Good morning, everybody. Aloha. Thank you. Please join me, our other speakers. Aloha, thank you for joining us today, and I'm especially grateful to see my colleague, Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, here to join us as we continue to fight back against Trump's authoritarian regime's attacks on public education. Since taking office or retaking office, President Trump and his Secretary of Education, billionaire Linda McMahon, have engaged in an all-out attack on public education. We're talking about public education that involves 50 million children. At every turn, they have created chaos and confusion, all at the expense of 50 million students. This time last year, you may remember that DOGE was firing hundreds of thousands of federal employees. 1 year ago today, they fired nearly half of the Federal Department of Education workforce. That's 2,000 employees, 2,000 public servants who shared one goal, and that was to help educate our kids. And of course, what could be more foundational than public education? And this regime has continued from day one to dismantle public school programs. Now, Trump knows that he can't just get rid of the Department of Education because Congress created the department, but he can do a lot of things to damage the programs of the department, to cut back the funding, to hold back funding, etc. So that's what he's doing. He's doing everything he can, mainly through executive orders, to undermine support for education. And this has led to numerous challenges in court against Trump's many executive orders. And while these court challenges play out, we are seeing the devastating consequences of these efforts to dismantle the Department of Education's programs. Take the Office of Civil Rights, for example. In March, Trump tried to fire employees at the Office of Civil Rights, but that was challenged, and the court told him that he can't do that. So what he did was to spend $38 million paying OCR employees not to come to work, which is the current situation at that office. Meanwhile, 90% of all civil rights complaints filed with the Department of Education are being dismissed. And each of these complaints represents a student or a teacher needing help, but they're not getting the help. As another example, this regime is moving $30 billion in education programs away from the Federal Department of Education to other departments, such as the Department of Labor, State Department, Interior. None of these departments have any wherewithal to run these programs. These are called interagency agreements. They have had no hearings on it. They're just implementing these, and eventually these programs are probably going to fall by the wayside. And these include programs that support low-income school districts, career and technical education programs, and Native students. And Trump is setting these programs up to fail. Know that by getting into these interagency agreements and shoving these programs to departments that do not have the experience or wherewithal to run these programs, he is setting these programs that our kids rely on for failure. So most recently, $350 million was stripped from 800 institutions, universities, all across the country, 800 institutions across the country, blue states, red states, just because these universities and colleges serve minority students. This is a program that supports minority serving, they're called minority serving institutions. So we know that the Trump regime will continue its attacks on the Department of Education, on federal workers, public schools, and the more than 50 million children across the country who rely on these programs. And that is why it is so important that we come together, calling attention to these attacks and alerting the American people to what is in store for the 50 million kids in our schools. And I tell you, part of the challenge for all of us is to mobilize the American people into the dangers of the lack of support for public schools. So we are doing that on a daily basis practically, and I have held 5 spotlight hearings focusing on the various cuts to education and the dismantling of these various programs. And I'm glad to be joined by those very advocates who are helping to spread the word. And I want to turn to my colleague, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, a champion of education. And when I have my spotlight hearings, Chris comes. So, Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mazie. Let's give Senator Hirono a big round of applause. And I want to thank all of you who are here to stand up to defend public education in America. Because make no mistake, it is public education that is under attack by the Trump administration. And public education has been the bedrock, the foundation for opportunity in America, trying to make sure that every student, regardless of their background, has an opportunity to succeed. And so when they come after public education, they're coming after the foundational idea of equal opportunity in the United States of America. So thank you for being here in this really important battle. I want to thank Senator Hirono. Mazie Hirono has been on the front lines of this battle since day one. She's organized those spotlight hearings that we've mentioned. Some of you have participated in them. But she has just been a fierce fighter for public education and against this assault. So Mazie, thank you again for all of your leadership. And to the allies who are here with us, thank you for standing up for education and for the federal employees that help make sure that we deliver those educational services. Because when you attack the federal employees who deliver educational services, you're really attacking the American people who are the beneficiaries of those services. We passed laws and established the Department of Education for a purpose, which is to ensure people can have a public education, that their civil rights are protected, that individuals with disabilities have an equal opportunity for education, and the whole host of other requirements that we want to make sure that every child has an opportunity in America. And that's the idea that's under assault here. And Elon Musk came in with his chainsaw. That was their metaphor, not ours. And they did. They just cut away, hacked away at public education. We have a Secretary of Education, McMahon, who says that it's her mission to eliminate the Department of Education. That's what she says. And so between her and Elon Musk, they teamed up early on to try to hack away at public education in America. And as Senator Hirono said, their purpose was ideological. It was not about efficiency, certainly not about making government more efficient. In fact, the GAO, who we rely on as an independent source, said, and Senator Hirono quoted this figure, it's a GAO figure, that they wasted, the Trump administration, wasted about $38 million because they got rid of a lot of people in the Office of Civil Rights, and then the courts told them, hey, you can't do that. And so they had to hire them back, some of them on a haphazard basis. So they wasted taxpayer money while they also tried to undermine the laws of the United States that guarantee civil rights to every student. Their next attack, and it took place around September, October, was on the Office for Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. And again, they tried to hack away at that. That would be bad anytime. It's especially outrageous on the 50th anniversary of the passage of the IDEA Act, which, as you know, requires that every student, regardless of ability, disability, has that equal education. So they wanted to dismantle that. Fortunately, as part of the agreements, we prevented them from eliminating that office, which they wanted to do. So this is an ongoing battle. It really is an ongoing battle for public education. We know the Trump administration wants to privatize education. They essentially would like to see more people be able to make more money off of education, and one way you do that is you undermine public education and people's confidence in public education. So we need to fight back at every turn. That's what Senator Hirono has been doing. That's what this great team here today is doing. I do want to end with a little ray of light, which is on the budget front. We were able to pass a budget that rejected the very deep cuts the Trump administration was proposing to essentially eliminate big parts of the Department of Education. But now our challenge, as we were discussing, is to once again get the Trump administration to follow the law, because they've got Russ Vought over at OMB, who is trying to once again undermine what Congress again did on a bipartisan basis. So that's just to end by saying that, unfortunately, we're going to be back here again, because the fight will go on, because this administration is focused on dismantling public education, and we need to fight for public education. So thank all of you for being here, and let me turn it back over to Senator Hirono.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So remember when I said that Trump is trying to dismantle all these programs for education through executive orders, but when I mentioned the latest assault on the minority granting institutions and withholding of hundreds of millions of dollars in grants, they didn't even bother with an executive order. You had Linda McMahon just sent out a memo saying we're going to use this money for other purposes. So that's what they're doing. There's absolutely no accountability. They just do it because they can. And that is why the fights continue. And we are now going to hear from Rachel Gittleman. She is the president of AFG Local 252, which represents federal workers within the Department of Education. And Rachel has been among those leading the fight against this RIF. And she was also a hearing witness at one of my spotlight hearings. Rachel?
All right.
Thank you, Senator Hirono and Senator Van Hollen, for your steadfast advocacy on behalf of the Department of Education and its employees, fired, retired, and still fighting, and for inviting AFGE Local 252 to participate in today's important press conference. My name is Rachel Gittleman, and I worked in the Ombudsman's Office of Federal Student Aid, an agency within the department. My job was to help borrowers navigate the overly complicated and dysfunctional student loan system. I was responsible for canceling millions of dollars in student debt for our most vulnerable borrowers. 1 year ago today, after 3 months of uncertainty, fear, and an astounding pressure to leave, my favorite job, I received an email from the agency stating that I was being fired and my organizational unit was being abolished to make the government more efficient. My system access was shut off, making it impossible to close out or transition any of my work to remaining colleagues. That meant I left nearly 400 student loan borrower cases open with no one to help them. I received that email along with nearly 1,400 of my colleagues. Another 600 were pressured to leave through one of the many resignation and early retirement programs, and nearly 100 probationary employees were also fired simply because they could be. In the course of less than 2 months, the Trump administration had cut our agency's workforce in half, which they bragged about. I couldn't sit by and do nothing, which is why I'm leading the fight to protect our agency, our jobs, and our education system. As president of AFGE Local 252, the union that represents more than 2,000 ed employees, both current and former. The U.S. Department of Education and its hardworking staff deliver roughly $150 billion in vital resources and support to tens of millions of students and families across the country, from early learning through graduate programs. Most of our programs focus on helping and protecting those traditionally underserved by education. That includes students of color, low-income students, students with disabilities, rural students, and English learners. Since January of last year, the department has canceled or reallocated billions of dollars in grants to schools and colleges for everything from student mental health to teacher training, including more than $12 billion in K-12 funding alone. Secretary McMahon tried to fire an additional 500 staff in October, which would have effectively closed the offices of K-12, special, and higher ed, and the Office for Civil Rights. These firings were thankfully paused by the courts and then halted by Congress. But just after the government reopened, following the historic 43-day shutdown, the Secretary announced 6 interagency agreements that will ostensibly shutter most of these offices at Ed. The Secretary is selling the department off for parts. She is playing politics with our students' futures and our careers. Now, the Department of Labor will run nearly all K-12 programs and higher ed programs in this country. These changes swap a highly efficient system for a chaotic, underfunded one spread across multiple agencies. Sadly, some days it feels like the media, many members of Congress, not you guys, and the American people have moved on. Granted, there's a lot to enrage us these days. Here's who hasn't moved on. My colleagues, many of whom are still struggling to find permanent employment after being unlawfully fired or forced into retirement last year. My colleagues who are still employed, still fighting, saddled with an impossible workload, terrified by the prospect of being fired, and reminded daily by the Secretary's ultimate goal, shuttering the agency. The disabled student loan borrower who has more than $500,000 in debt she took out so her kids could have a brighter future. I was fired before I could successfully help her get her loans discharged based on her disability. The child with disabilities who cannot access his school playground because he uses a walker, yet his Office for Civil Rights Complaints sits in a backlog of 25,000 unanswered complaints because the administration would rather play politics than help students who don't have access. The rural student whose community overwhelmingly depends on dwindling federal funding that's been slashed or reallocated or delayed due to partisan decisions and understaffing. The Title I middle school math teacher who no longer gets the on-the-job training she needs because the department canceled her grant program. And a first-generation college student that will no longer have access to basic needs support and child care programs or job opportunities because the Secretary decided to sell the department for parts rather than do her job. All of these people deserve better, and we will not stop fighting for them. As we commemorate this solemn day, I also want to shed light on the many wins we've had throughout the last year. While more than 1,000 of us were terminated last year, our case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and that case is still going. Plus, nearly 400 of my fired colleagues have gotten their jobs back for various reasons, and we won in court when Secretary McMahon tried to fire an additional nearly 500 staffers during the government shutdown in October. And then Congress put a stop to those unlawful firings. And these are just court cases related to our staff. We've had more wins in court by our advocacy groups, our fellow unions, our state and local education agencies, and higher ed institutions, demanding the department release billions in funding withheld because of partisan political ideals. Earlier this year, Congress passed a new budget that plainly rejects the Trump administration's ongoing attempts to slash billions in federal education spending. It also rejects the administration's misguided efforts to dismantle the department by transferring workers and functions to other agencies. The budget affirms what we have known all along. The law matters, federal expertise matters, and the will of the people matters. Although the agency has already defied Congress by issuing 2 additional interagency agreements, the legislation still provides us the framework to hold them accountable. And that's what we call on Congress to do. Hold the Trump administration accountable for breaking the law. Stand up for federal workers. Stand up for the tens of millions of students and families who rely on the U.S. Department of Education's programs and services. Keep doing what Senators Hirono and Durbin and Van Hollen have consistently done. Put a spotlight on the harm that the Trump administration is causing our students and families. The Trump administration has shown it will stop at nothing, even ignoring court orders and violating federal law to dismantle the department and sow chaos for students, families, communities, and my coworkers. They will continue to undermine the careers of thousands of dedicated public servants who work every day to support our students and families. We need Congress to step up on behalf of students and families by holding this administration accountable. I believe deeply that government can and should serve the people of this nation. But beyond that, every member of our union is a person who has been impacted by and served by the programs and services we administer. We will continue to fight like hell to serve our students and protect what our agency stands for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Next, we're going to hear from my colleague, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, another champion of public schools, DACA, you name the cause, he is there. Dick?
Senator Hirono, thanks for your leadership on this issue. We are certainly at your beck and call when we need to make these announcements. Because what's at stake is something that's very fundamental. Ask any American family what their priority is. Education of their kids is the top priority. If you're going to create an opportunity for your kids to have a better life, they need a better school than parents probably had, and they need to have the challenges and the information to be responsive at this moment in our history. This may be the highest priority for American families. It is obviously no priority for the Trump administration. They came marching into the Department of Education, realizing they had their Project 2025 marching orders, and started lopping off heads right and left, taking professionals who have given their lives to the quality of education in America and dismissing them, telling them they weren't needed anymore. So now we have a Department of Education in name only. There's no leadership there, there's no support there, and school districts across the country are paying the price for that. The taxes that families pay to support schools will be higher because of this decision not to provide federal assistance. I'm honored to be here today and make it clear. The Department of Education is the department for the future of America. We need to restore this department and the professionals there to make the schools and education better and give our kids a fighting chance in this new economy. Thanks, Senator Hirono. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Durbin. And we are now going to hear from Carrie Rodriguez. She is the president of the National Parents Union. We have to mobilize the parents all across the country. And her organization represents 1.7 million parents and caregivers throughout the country. Carrie has also been among those leading the fight against the RIF, and she brings the important perspective of parents to this cause. Carrie?
Thank you so much, Senator. Hi there, I'm Carrie Rodriguez. I'm Matthew, Miles, and David's mom, also president of the National Parents Union. I'm also the wife of an educator. And when I woke up this morning in Boston at about 4 o'clock, my husband got up with me. And we were laughing for a minute because he's headed into a 5th grade classroom today to talk about the 3 branches of government and our beautiful system of checks and balances. And I've got to get on a plane because it's not working. And what are we telling our children in this moment? What are we leaving for them in their future if we're not standing up to protect this system in this moment and to make it work for our children? And I've got to be honest with you, parents across this country have had enough. For months, families have been watching while the Department of Education has been dismantled in real time. We've seen programs cuts, grants frozen, phones ringing in empty offices. This is not reform. This is abandonment. And it's dressed up like it's a policy agenda, but this is the abandonment of children and families across this country. And it's not what parents want. We know that because we asked them. In multiple national polls conducted across the political spectrum, parents, Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike have been unambiguous. They want the Department of Education to continue to exist and to do its job. Congress reinforced that message through the 2026 appropriations process, making it clear that education programs should remain within the department. We have done our homework on this and know where parents stand. And I will tell you, as a basketball mom, sitting in the court, it's playoff season, guys. There's a lot of us sitting in there. Parents are coming up to me left and right. I'll tell you anecdotally. My senior director of policy, she's a hockey mom over here. Parents are making a beeline for her across the rink, saying, what is going on here and how can we stop it? And yet, instead of listening to us or following the direction of Congress, families have been left to absorb the consequences of somebody else's ideology. In fact, we're now putting a man's face on the Department of Education who built his entire brand, telling young Americans like my sons that education was indoctrination and that college is a trap. And now that ideology has a seat at the table where decisions about our children's future are being made. Parents didn't put it there. Parents have been fighting it, and we're not done fighting. They cut the Office of Civil Rights in half. For special ed parents like me, 3 out of 5 of my sons have 504s or IEPs. This is a direct insult. It's an attack on our rights under the IDEA Act and our attempts to get justice to make sure the system works for our kids. They thought we wouldn't notice. Let me tell you something, friends. We notice. We always notice. There are parents in this country right now who have filed civil rights complaints to protect their children and have heard nothing back. Nothing. We are yelling into the void. That is not governance. That is abandonment. And apparently doing your job is now optional at the Department of Education. Somebody forgot to tell us as parents. Congress is telling them to keep the lights on, and they're still fumbling for the switch. So let's be clear about what DOGE actually is or was, whatever it is right now. It's not efficiency. It's not innovation. It was a wrecking ball swung by people who will never need the government that they're destroying. They gutted the State Department, and now Americans are stranded abroad with no one to call. They fired federal workers mid-mission, people who showed up every single day to serve this country, and they call it a win. And they've hollowed out the Department of Education in the same way, while children's civil rights complaints are collecting dust. That's not cutting fat. That's cutting people, real Americans, and the bill is coming due. And I want to say something directly to the people who are still inside the Department of Education, because we know that you're still there and you're still holding on. We see you. We know that you are working under the conditions that would make most people walk out. You stay anyway for our children. Parents across this country are watching. We see you and we are grateful. But for the people who are making these decisions, parents didn't sign up for chaos. And that is all we get. Constant bombardment of chaos under this administration. We signed up for schools that work. We want the department focused on what it was built to do, making sure that every child in America can learn how to read, that math achievement is real, that families have actual choices that work for them. That is the mission. The mission is not to burn it all down. This country needs American moonshots for education. Every child, every neighborhood, every zip code prepared for a life of economic mobility and opportunity. And parents are ready for that fight. The question really is, in this moment, whether our leaders are ready to stop the damage and start doing their jobs like the rest of us have to. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. So we are now hearing from Allison Sokol. She is the Vice President of Policy and Research for the Education Trust, a national nonprofit focused on addressing racial and economic barriers to education. Allison.
Thank you, Senator Hirono and Senator Durbin, for your leadership. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Allison Sokol, Vice President of P12 Policy Practice and Research at EdTrust. We are a national nonprofit focused on closing opportunity gaps and advancing racial and economic justice in education. We believe education is not simply a pathway to opportunity, it is a civil right for every child in this country. As you've heard from these other amazing speakers, for more than 40 years, the Department of Education has helped protect that right by enforcing civil rights laws and ensuring resources reach students and schools across this country. And today that promise is under attack. This month marks 1 year since the administration initiated a historic and unlawful reduction in force at the Department of Education, cutting nearly half of the agency's workforce. And a year later, the results are incredibly clear. These cuts, as you've heard from others, were never about improving services for schools or students or families. They were a blunt tool to fulfill a campaign promise and weaken the federal role in education. And who's paying the price? It's students and families and communities. A federal watchdog recently found that the department spent tens of millions of taxpayer dollars paying Office of Civil Rights staff not to work, even as the backlog of discrimination and harassment complaints from students and families skyrocketed. Meanwhile, the lowest number of civil rights cases in over a decade have been resolved. Instead of addressing the over 25,000 pending complaints of racial discrimination, harassment, and unfair treatment in schools, the administration's inaction is betraying its obligation to enforce the laws in this country. That is government dysfunction, paid for by taxpayers and felt by students, especially our most vulnerable students. More broadly, the sweeping cuts announced across the department a year ago hollowed out critical offices responsible for research and education oversight, civil rights protections, and other essential functions. And the consequences are very, very real. When the federal government steps back from protecting education, students don't get less bureaucracy, they get fewer protections, and they get fewer supports. It doesn't streamline government, it creates confusion for states, chaos for schools, and fewer safeguards for the students who need them most. And we're already seeing the effects. Grants are slowing down, oversight has weakened, civil rights complaints take longer to resolve, and increasingly are just being dismissed without investigation. And the students most at risk are the ones who have always faced the greatest barriers. Students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, multilingual learners, and students with disabilities. At the same time, the administration is dismantling the department itself and scattering education programs across federal agencies that were never designed to run education policy. And so while the department is being sabotaged, the federal government will also spend billions in taxpayer dollars soon for a private school voucher scheme that lacks any transparency or accountability or civil rights protections. Our public dollars should strengthen public schools that serve every child, not subsidize private systems that can pick and choose who they serve. Taken together, these actions represent what we at EdTrust call the Great American Heist, because that's what it is, it's a heist. An effort to strip public education of its funding, of its protections, and of its promise of opportunity. Because public education is not just a government program, and it's certainly not bureaucratic bloat, it is the foundation of our democracy. And our students aren't talking points, they're not political pawns. I have 3 of them, and they are my and our nation's greatest responsibility. They, my kids, and all of the children out there, especially our most vulnerable students, deserve a Department of Education strong enough to protect their rights and a government committed to investing in their future. Thank you to the senators who are leading and deeply committed to that future. Thank you. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. So all of the chaos that has been created comes when you have a regime that actually announces their goal is to get rid of the federal support for public schools, and they are very busy doing it. So they actually announce what they're going to do, and they're busy doing it. Who's going to stand up to that? It's not just members of Congress, but it's every American who cares about public education, and that, as far as I'm concerned, should be all of us. So members of the press, thank you for being here. Do you all have any questions at this point? Yes.
Joey with Federal News Network, thanks so much for doing this.
Can you come forward, please?
Yeah, Senator Van Hollen earlier had mentioned how the Education Department has been fully funded for the fiscal year, and yet these interagency agreements are still going on. To what extent, if any, is that fully funded budget limiting the Education Department proceeding with these interagency agreements, moving employees out, moving programs out?
So the interagency agreements are being implemented. And so even as we stand here and talk about how can they do that without any hearings, without any input, they're doing it because they can. This is a regime that does all kinds of things because they can. And that is why there are literally over 500 lawsuits to prevent this regime from its illegalities. So meanwhile, that is going on, that these interagency agreements are going on to agencies that do not have the experience or wherewithal to conduct these programs. So that's happening. That's just one part. The next on their hit list, they just have a long hit list of everything you can think of. There is no accountability. That is why it is with a sense of urgency that we stand here to say, hey, America, wake up. So you can help in that regard. Anybody else? Yes.
Thank you, Senator Michael Jones from Once Upon a Hill. I'm curious if you all can speak about the impact of these cuts, of these actions from the Trump administration, specifically on red states and students in red states, Republican-led states. This isn't an issue. Yeah, this isn't an issue that only affects the constituents that you both represent in your states. It affects students from across the country. So I'm hoping you speak to the American people about the impacts on all students, not just the ones that you all represent.
Thank you for raising that, because the support that the Department of Education provides goes to every single state, regardless of whether you are a red state or not. And it is astounding to me that our Republican colleagues do not seem to share our sense of urgency that these cuts are impacting their constituents. So when I mentioned, for example, the $350 million in withholding of grants that should go to minority granting institutions, every single state has minority granting institutions, red states, blue states, 800 of them, and they're seeing these grants being repurposed because Linda McMahon says so. So this is why mobilizing is really important. If my Republican colleagues don't hear from their constituents in those red states, they think that everything's okay. Everything's not okay, but apparently they haven't felt that heat. So this is why we're here, to continue to shine the light on the fact that this is happening to 50 million students all across the country. State of Hawaii, for example, the Federal Department of Education provides programmatic support amounting to over $350 million. The state of Hawaii does not have the resources to close that gap. And I would say that every state, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in federal education money to every state. I don't see how any state has the money. I don't know if Illinois does, I doubt it, to make up the gap that will come with the ending of federal support for public schools. Thanks for the question. Yes.
So the Government Accountability Office recently published a study regarding how the administration's cutting in half of all federal student aid workers basically made it impossible for them to review the student loan services. And so they've had basically no accountability for the last year plus. What's your reaction to that, and the sort of sensitive spot it puts borrowers in?
So the student aid program was at one time going to be shunted off to the Small Business Administration, one of the smallest agencies. They have no wherewithal to do what they're supposed to be doing, much less dealing with millions of student loan borrowers. So that agency is, that program is in chaos. And there are all these people with questions as to what's happening with their loans. Can they get support? Can they? These questions go unanswered. So that is yet another program. And by the way, the big beautiful bill, which I call the big ugly bill, they made massive changes to the student loan program so that it makes it a lot harder for people to get loans that are federally backed. In fact, this regime would like the people who need loans to go to college to go to the private sector, where there can be all kinds of fraud and abuse that can take place. So that's where they're going. They just want out of the business of supporting education. And by the way, if you are, for example, going into nursing, they do a whole thing on that nursing is not considered like a legitimate graduate program. So there will be no loans for you if you're going into nursing. So if you look at the big ugly bill, it is replete with various programs that shift money to anything other than education.
educational agencies, and you've mentioned that the fear is that there's going to be a challenge to get the Trump administration to follow the law. I'm wondering, what do you think that challenge might look like, and what steps are you taking to...
Dick, would you like to respond to the fact that they don't like to follow the law?
It's nothing short of a miracle that we passed so many of the appropriation bills on a bipartisan basis. And frankly, in many instances, like education, we ended up defying the administration's request and putting in a bipartisan number which was much better. It remains to be seen whether the administration will pay any attention to what we did at all. We've seen over and over again they ignore the law, they ignore the standing precedent, they could care less about people being riffed and dismissed, and they go their own way and say, fight me in court. And we've had to do that over and over and over again. That's unfortunate. It reflects an attitude toward government which is new to me, and I'm a fellow who's been on the Hill for a few years. I've never seen anybody quite do this. So that's what we're up against. They ignore the law even when we have bipartisanship. Okay? I think that's it, Senator.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to add one note regarding the bipartisan appropriation bills that we passed. We had to put in language, and we can thank Patty Murray and Rosa DeLauro. They are the ranking members of the relevant appropriation committees. They had to really fight to put in language to prevent this regime from moving money around and so-called repurposing money and rescinding bills, the appropriations that have already been approved by us. And so there had to be this kind of language. These are not normal times, people. So to have a regime that says we are going to get rid of support for public education, that is absolutely not normal. But there you have it. And so please help us pass the word. Thank you very much.
Aren't you supposed to say aloha?